I want to talk about why the polls have been so off up until now, and it's extremely unlikely that the race between Harris and Trump is going to be as close as most models are predicting. Because the Fort Hays poll from Kansas and the Selzer poll from Iowa are kind of confirming what a lot of us already suspected, and that is that Harris is actually doing a lot better than initially projected, and there might even be a blue blowout for Harris. The first thing is that a lot of American mainstream polls like Atlas Intel, Tip Insights, Hart Research, and the Emerson College, which are the ones getting cited most often by mainstream news outlets, are appearing to be engaging in a data-altering practice called herding. I can get more into how herding works in another video if you want, but the short version is that pollsters who herd their results are deliberately shifting any data points they see as outliers closer to what other similar surveys are showing so that if they end up being wrong, they don't get singled out as an unreliable pollster and are seen as more in line with the crowd. But what happens when a lot of different surveys on the same subject start herding is that it forms a vicious cycle that causes those data points to grow tighter and tighter until you inevitably end up with a poll projection calling for a dead heat that actually isn't representative of what the unaltered data show. Another problem is that a lot of pollsters are still spooked by what happened in 2016 when pretty much every polling source was calling an easy win for Hillary, but Trump ended up drastically overperforming on election night, proving pretty much every election prediction incorrect save for people like Alan Lichtman and the Selzer poll. This means that a lot of polls are worried about the same thing happening again for Trump, so most surveys are overinflating his poll projections to cover their bases, which is compounding the problem of herding and leading to even further artificial inflation of Trump's chances in the election, and is ignoring the fact that the 2024 election is materially different in a lot of important ways from the 2016 election. This also isn't accounting for groups like Patriot Polling, which are owned by conservative interests and deliberately inflate Trump's numbers so that if he loses, it lends more credence to the false idea that Harris stole the election from him. And finally, we have the issue of Nate Silver, who is often cited as a pollster when he is in fact only aggregating other people's polls and creating averages based on those polls across the board, regardless of whether or not the source is biased. Nate Silver is essentially the Rotten Tomatoes of polling in that his numbers and projections are largely arbitrary aggregations and averages of polls at large that mislead the general public into assuming that all poll sources are equally trustworthy when they are not. Even worse, his models often include betting surveys and gambling odds, which are directed at predicting odds with the highest potential risk-to-reward ratios, not the most likely results. All of this has led to the sustained illusion of a dead heat between Trump and Harris, while the most reliable sources have been calling a Harris-favored race for a while, such as Alan Lichtman and Ipsos poll. The main reason you're seeing sources like CNN and CBS suddenly changing their poll predictions to Harris blowouts as of last night at the last minute is because these sources didn't want to be the first ones to post Harris-leading projections, and were waiting for more reliable sources like the Iowa Selzer poll to call it first so they could claim crowd mentality in case of a miss on this year's prediction. Long and short of it, no one wants to be the first to get it wrong. They want to claim, oh, well, they misled us. And overall, the rapid adjustments that we are seeing in mainstream polls in the past 72 hours is a result of using fallacy-riddled models and projections for a good chunk of this year, and those models finally falling apart in the face of more historically reliable polls and more accurate data coming through instead of deliberately herded results. And none of this is to say that you should skip voting. Go vote anyway. Don't get complacent.
Yes, my decorations are still up. They will remain up until after everything. But there are so many of us who are voting for Harris who are refusing to put up signs for safety reasons. And I do not doubt that the poll that says that Harris is ahead in Iowa is true. Because Iowa, like many other Dems who are really smart, they fly under the radar. And the only reason why I am posting the video from the previous person is because I think people really do need to understand what happened so that January 6th doesn't happen again.